Welcome to Check Out My Dad Pod, a podcast by a dad, with dads, and for dads. My name is Mike Wickett, and in the span of a year, I went from a father of 0 to a father of 3. So after 20 years on the radio, I hung up my headphones to stay at home with my kids. And I'm here on this podcast to talk about it with you. And inside the Koss Headphone Studios, this is Check Out My Dad Pod. It's another episode of Check Out My Dad Pod. My name is Mike Wickett. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to jump in. Normally, when we have the dads on, our guest dad of the week, they're secluded in a room. They've gone to their, man cave, or they're in their basement or out on the deck. But this week, our guest dad of the week is going to join us from his kitchen floor in the middle of making slime. Brian Rissmiller is my guest dad of the week, and he joins me from Houston, Texas. Brian, how is the slime making going? It sounds loud.
Yes, so probably not going to be very successful because most of the glow-in-the-dark glue has already been used on who knows what.
Sure.
So we have a lot of the magic liquid and not much of the glue, so we're going to see how it goes.
So for those that don't know, you're in Houston, you're a pediatrician, and you have 3 daughters. I can't imagine you get a ton of sleep, my friend.
No, and especially not a lot of sleep without one of them trying to touch me.
Yeah, I bet. Hey, if you can, go back to a time when you didn't have any kids. If you can, describe what life was like for you as a dad. And now, how old are your girls, by the way, now?
So 3 of them, the oldest will be 9 in about a month, actually.
Okay.
October 4th. The middle one turned 5 back in June, and the youngest is a little bit over 3.5.
8, 5, and 3.5. You've spaced them out well, unlike my wife, Lee, and I, who jammed 3 into 1 year. But take me back, say, 9.5, 10 years, Brian, for you and your wife. What was the peaceful life like for you?
Since you've asked me to do this, I've actually been thinking about that. And, things were still busy. I don't know what we did, to be honest with you, but it still felt busy. I guess it was just a different busy. And so back then we were still in Houston. I was doing training to be a physician, and I guess I was pretty busy with that. But other than that, I think it was just kind of the normal things that young people do. Going out, making dinner, watching movies. I can remember we had an adult slip and slide party in our backyard.
You don't have those anymore? That doesn't happen with just adults?
It does happen, interestingly enough. For the middle one's birthday party this June, we actually busted out the slip and slides. And they still work, the same ones. So it was interesting. You just kind of adapt. I mean, it was a very different clientele, if you will, for the party.
Yes, I understand.
And different activities, but it was still a lot of fun either way.
Were you guys always trying? How long till after, or from the point when you got married, or you got real serious, to we're trying to start a family? What was that process like, without going into some of the details?
Yeah. And so my wife and I, we're high school sweethearts. So we met all the way back in 1998. And so getting a look, is that the wrong year? 97? I don't know.
I'll edit it. It's fine. Don't worry.
And so for us, we got married in 2006. And then we kind of had we were both working. We knew that I was going to be going into medical training. And so we kind of timed it so that it was towards the end of that training that we would have our first kid. So we kind of mapped it out a little bit. Do you want me to repeat it? Anyway, so we kind of planned it out that we would wait a little while after we were married. So we kind of got to enjoy probably about 4 or 5 years of just being married ourselves, which I think was really good because it kind of, solidified some of those quirks about each other that you could learn to live with before you throw kids in the mix.
Did you, when you were growing up and when you and your wife Mallory were, starting your life together, did you always want to be a father? Was that something you knew from the start you wanted to do?
Yes, I think so. I think kind of implicitly, I don't know if we ever actually talked about it, but I think we both wanted kids. I had 3 brothers. She has 1 sister. So from relatively large, active families. So we kind of always knew we wanted kids. It was just a matter of when that would work out timing wise with kind of everything else that we had going on.
As
so me being
I'm sorry,
a
go ahead.
me being a pediatrician, I love kids. So I think for me, it was never a question of kids or not. It was more when and how many.
As we're doing this and I'm watching the 3 run around you right now, and if you're listening to the podcast, you hear the 3 running around Brian right now as well. Is it everything you thought it would be?
Everything and more. I think if you had asked me before having any of them, would you want boys or girls? How many? I probably would have wanted definitely 3 to 4, and probably a mix of both. I have memories of growing up with my brothers, kind of playing catch in the backyard with your dad. And so when we had all girls, I was like, I don't know what to do, but it kind of doesn't matter. You kind of figure those things out. And so I still play sports with them. We still kick balls around. They love to do things like that. The oldest plays softball. I've learned a lot more about dance than I ever thought possible. Cheerleading. I've got a Cheer Dad t-shirt. And they're all looking at me like, why aren't you saying the things that I do? And so it's just been fantastic. And I think you really learn a new definition of what love is and kind of unconditional love when you come home, from a long day at work, and one of them just wants to sit by you and watch TV. And it's just comforting to know that, they miss you and they want to be with you no matter what.
Did you ever get advice on how to be a dad, whether it was from your father, your brother, anyone else ever give you any advice?
So my dad, I think at some point in time, would kind of try to give me little tips and pearls. Never kind of sat me down and be like, hey, these are the 5 lessons that I learned, do these 5 things and you'll be fine. But I think it was little things, and I definitely look up to him as a role model and think of the way that he did things, and whether that was, disciplining in a certain way or giving more freedom than probably most parents do. And so I think that, even at young ages, I've encouraged them to be themselves and to kind of figure things out for themselves and not always give them the answer, which is something that I remember my dad doing. And so even if it wasn't direct kind of, hey, we're drinking scotch and smoking cigars and he's giving me the secret to being a father, I definitely think I learned some things from him.
Have you started smoking cigars and drinking scotch with your daughters? Or are you holding off a little bit on that?
The farthest I've gotten is I've gotten them to do illegal sparklers on the deck.
Whoa,
I mean,
man.
Gonna get in trouble.
Does mom know about that?
She does. She does.
Hey, when people talk about it, and sometimes like in your family, obviously I could see with you on the ground and being a pediatrician and knowing you for as long as I've known you, do dads get enough credit in 2020? Do you think that paradigm, that idea is shifting, that we don't do as much, or is there some credence to it?
I think like anything else, there's truth on both sides. And so I think the traditional paradigm of what a family is, going back, to the 1950s or whatever, has been slowly turned on its head over the subsequent 50 years. And I think the pandemic has, exacerbated that and kind of brought it to the forefront of everyone's attention. Because there's always been families where there's, stay-at-home dads that do that, and the wife in a traditional, family structure does that. But I think everyone now is kind of challenged to go outside their comfort zones and contribute in ways that they didn't have to before. And whether that's helping with school at home, maybe you can't do the 9 to 5 schedule anymore. Maybe your schedule is 9 to noon, and then someone else does something in the afternoon and you're at home. And so I think I think as the world has evolved, so has the concept and the expectations and demands of fatherhood. And I think most fathers are rising to that challenge. Whether they get credit or not, that's a whole nother story. I think as a society as a whole, we don't give credit to people. We have these kind of super high expectations that everyone will be perfect, and then ridicule them when they fail. But I think part of being a father is actually showing your children how to fail and how to grow from failure.
I think you cheated because for the rest of us, we didn't know anything about what babies were like. You went to school to be a pediatrician, so you had an idea on what it was going to be like. For me, no clue. But for you, go back almost 9 years ago when your oldest daughter was born. What was the first day like, the first week like? Because for the rest of us that aren't baby doctors, we're literally like, is that supposed to come out of there? Is that supposed to tie? Like, we didn't really know what the hell to do.
Yeah, it's still scary, even for me. So I think that's a completely normal feeling. I think if you want a piece of advice on what to do in those early days for everyone out there, provided that your child is born in a hospital, ask the nurses or whoever's there taking care of the babies to teach you how to swaddle them. And it will be a life-saving skill for probably at least the first 6 months, if not longer. Now, like you said, I cheated because I had essentially months where I worked in a nursery, and that was one of the skills that I picked up. And to this day, Mallory still can't swaddle children, my wife. It's just
luckily, they're old. They seem to be old enough where they don't need to be swaddled. I feel like sometimes Mallory needs to learn how to swaddle you.
Probably true. I would appreciate that. So I think that's just kind of an example. But the other thing I think is, don't be afraid. You're not going to break a kid. That they're much hardier than they look, little newborn babies, and that what I tell new parents when I meet them and new dads that are anxious and nervous is, it's going to be okay. You don't need to know what to do. If you think back through like the history of time, people were raising babies and being chased by saber-toothed tigers. This is actually the example that I use, and that people were able to figure it out. So it's okay that you don't have to respond to everything, and every kid, every baby's different, and you'll have basically an innate knowledge of how to help and fill your role.
You went from 1 to 2 in a matter of 4 years. Was there ever a part of you that said, we're good at 1, or did you automatically know that after your first that she needed to have a sibling?
I think I don't think there was ever a time between 1 and 2 where we weren't going to have a second one. I think it was always going to be at least 2, and I think it was again more just kind of finding that time in when it would work to financially and room and stuff like that. So I don't think we ever considered stopping at 2. Now I will say between 2 and 3, there was probably a little bit of discussion of, is that enough or not? Part of that was also driven by, like I've said, I've had 3 brothers. So for my parents, there's 8 grandchildren. Every single one of them is a girl.
Oh,
and
wow.
Our third was probably the last hope. So, because I have one younger brother, and he had twin girls, so they were like, nope, we're done.
Done. I understand that. Again, it's weird to talk to you because you're a pediatrician and you know more about kids than any of the dads I've had on in the 25 episodes that I've done so far. But were there any lessons you learned that you didn't already know from baby 1 to baby 2, and even 2 to 3?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I think you kind of make it through that first kid and you're like, okay, I got this. We know our plan. We know what we're going to do. We know what works. And then you realize it didn't work. You're like, wait, this worked perfectly with the first one. Our first one was a great sleeper. Got into her kind of crib and bed and on and on and on, and still sleeps great. I'd say that like she's a teenager. If we would let her, she'd sleep until noon. The second one, but as soon as basically she kind of got moved out of the crib for the third one a little bit, maybe that's where the problem was. But since then, not not a good sleeper. And we blew that one. So yeah, there's always things that you're learning, and just, whether it's just normal development stuff that, one kid does things faster, and then you start to worry, like, oh, you start to compare them in some ways, and like, oh, the first one was scribbling better at this age, and should I be worried? This one learned when to ride a tricycle. This one crawled super early. Why aren't the other ones? So yes, you're definitely learning things, and then from a health perspective, I think they all, this is probably me being more of a pediatrician, but they tend to all have separate health problems and challenges. That's always a little bit different, and where you think everything's going to be perfectly fine, and then a surprise curveball comes your way. So I think regardless of how much knowledge you have of how kids are supposed to grow, you're always continuously surprised.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like, we're just learning the difference in our three and the two twins, and they're all our three babies are all so close to each other. You have them more spaced out, so it's interesting to hear how you do a 2 or 3 year trial run, and then you do another 2 or 3 year trial run, and then you have another 2 or 3 year trial run. It feels like about 10 years ago, Kobe Bryant died, with everything that has happened. And when we lost Kobe Bryant, the hashtag girl dad was trending. And I thought of you because I know you had 3 daughters, and I've got 2 and the boy. But what does being a girl dad mean to a father of 3 girls?
So I would say being a girl dad means embracing all the things that girls like with the same passion and spunk and vigor that you would things that you know more about. And whether that's princesses and tiaras and tea parties, or basketball and whatever your kid is into, I think it's in some ways it's de-identifying gender with things that are important to you, and you can still share those parts of yourself that you would share with a son, with a daughter, and it's not taking away those opportunities from a child that would enjoy them.
This summer has been really, really weird. I mean, like I said, it feels like 10 years ago Kobe died, and it was, January or February or whatever. It was January. It was right around the time that my oldest turned 1, and so much has happened. And I don't know what life is like for a parent with 3 kids and they're of school age during the pandemic. What was the summer like for you guys?
Yeah, we the way I've talked about it is we've basically been on summer break since the first week in March. And basically what happened to us is schools closed, I think, a day early for spring break, and basically didn't open back up. And so we've been on, what is it now, 5-6 months of summer vacation, which sounds fantastic.
Not for the parents.
Until you realize, wait, there's a reason summer break's only 3 months.
Yeah.
And so, it's a challenge of motivation, both for yourself and your kids. It's a challenge of schedule, and it's because it's not just school. You also lost all of the other structured activities that you used to be able to do. So, the softball season was cut short, activities, after school activities. So you're trying to basically supply all of that while continuing to do everything that you were doing before. And it's nearly impossible to do. So you have to give yourself grace. And I think, if your kids are in that range where they can kind of understand, you almost have to partner with them to be like, hey, things aren't going to be the same, but these things that you enjoy to do, we can find a slightly different way to try and do some of them.
As a dad, I mean, you have one of those jobs where I don't think you can just work from home as a pediatrician. People can sell from home and do whatever they do. A lot of this Zoom stuff has been really, really popular. That hasn't been the case for you. Have you been able to stay home with your kids? I mean, has it been more limited? What's your schedule been like as a person who has to take care of other people's kids?
Yeah. So my schedule at Baseline is crazy. So I'll work 7 days in a row in the hospital, and then I'll work overnight shifts. And so it's always been kind of crazy, which in some ways makes it easier to adapt like this because they're a little bit used to the craziness and unpredictability of it. But I think one of the big challenges was those times when I wouldn't be taking care of patients, but trying to do the other aspects of my job. Those were the hardest because you weren't able to really go into the office. So trying to find a way similar to this, trying to have a meeting where I'm talking to someone on the phone, but they're also craving attention in some way. That's definitely been a challenge. And as evidenced by this, I clearly haven't mastered it.
Well, look, I think it's really impossible to master anything as a father, and I'm only 19 months into this thing. You got a bit of a leg up on me on that. From your medical professional perspective, how have people been handling the coronavirus pandemic? I mean, are you seeing more kids come in? Are people behaving properly? I don't know what's going on in Texas. I know for a while, Texas was one of the hottest, if not the hottest state in the union. So how has that affected you from a pediatrician standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's been a roller coaster ride is what I would say. So in the beginning, lots of things closed down, and from a medical perspective, there's lots of things to worry about with kids especially. So you have to worry about kids that are, actively sick is one thing, kids that need to go to the emergency room and things like that. That structure kind of stayed in place. There might have been some, parents that let things go longer than they normally would. Whereas, my kid's just a little bit sick. Let me take them in now versus, things are crazy. Let's see if this gets better at home. And so there was probably some kids that were a little bit sicker when they presented for care than normal with that. And then there's a whole aspect with children of preventative care. So taking your children to well child checks and, getting vaccines and doing all those things that even though they're physically well, keeps them that way. And I think that's where there was kind of almost a 2 to 3 month pause on everything that we're still trying to get caught up back on. And normally the big push to get all of that stuff done is schools. Going back to school, you have to kind of have that physical form filled out. You have to have all those forms to starting school. And I think there's since a lot of the schools here are starting virtual, there's not that push this year. And so I think there's some hesitancy about, what are kind of the unseen dangers of this. And I think that's one of them. I think from a, psychological perspective, this has been a challenge for everyone. And I think there's, for lack of a better way of putting it, there's years and years of psychotherapy that will be needed for the country as a whole. And so anyone out there that's young and looking for a profession, job security, that's probably a good one right now.
How have your kids handled not seeing? I mean, I imagine your 3-year-old doesn't quite understand it, but how is your 8-year-old? Because my 8-year-old nephew, who's now 9, he's just been very depressed over the summer because he hasn't been able to see his friends, and he's not happy that school is starting virtually. What about yours for your 8 and your 5-year-old?
Yeah, it's the 8-year-old, I think, has done a really good job of we've kind of liberalized her ability to chat and talk with her friends, taking advantage of some of the kind of safer messaging services. And so she's been able to kind of fill that void with some of her friends. So not even, not being able to see them in person, but still communicate in some way. The 5-year-old is actually, scheduled to, would have been in kindergarten right now. And I think, I don't think she realizes is what I would say. I think she's kind of in that happy-go-lucky stage right now, thankfully. And so I think looking forward, I think what would be more challenging than starting virtually is if we, went back to school for X number of time and then had to switch back to virtual. I think that would actually be kind of the worst case scenario. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But those are some of the things that we're trying.
Are you guys all virtual right now? Is your 8-year-old in virtual?
Yeah, they actually postponed our school year, so it starts next Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
So we've been kind of doing the ramp up this week. She actually goes this afternoon to kind of a drive-through parade to meet her teacher. And then they'll actually start classwork on next Monday.
Do you miss the diaper phase, my friend?
Ha! No. That actually, that I have to say, the pandemic actually ended that for us.
Oh, really?
yeah, back in March, we had been talking about doing it, and we're like, oh, we don't have time, and things like that. And we were just like, you know what, we're all kind of stuck here, so let's just fight this battle now. And surprisingly, it went fairly well. It was like a 3 to 5 day battle, and after that, she was like, I got this. Girls are much easier than boys.
You potty trained your daughter in 5 days?
Well, I think the record is the first one. Mallory actually did it over a weekend, because back with the first one, I was just like, it's easier to do diapers. I don't want to have to worry about things. So a weekend that I was working and wasn't present, she did it all by herself. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, props to her.
Wow. I think parents listening, dads listening, and the mothers that listen to this podcast as well are blown away by that. I say this to every guest. If you do miss changing diapers, Brian, I just bought 1,700 of them last week, and that should get us to about mid-October.
Gotcha. So the pandemic has made you a hoarder, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, my wife loves a good Costco diaper sale, which saves $7.50 off every box. So we have saved about $100 in diapers, but now they're taking up all the closet space that we have. But 2 months for about 1,700 diapers seems like a lot, but we do about 30 to 35 a day around here. So even though you might work and change diapers, if you change your mind and you need to change any, you just come up to Des Moines.
I mean, only if you promise me that I can use all the diaper boxes to build a giant box fort.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, I'm going to let you go, but I want to ask, of course, Hurricane Laura moved through your area about a week and a half ago. I texted your wife about it. I didn't get your phone number until like 2 days ago. But how are you guys? Were you safe? Did any damage happen? Because I know Hurricane Harvey 3 years ago really affected you. What about Laura?
So Laura, thankfully, we were fine. So there was mostly all preparation, but it was far enough east of us that we had no problems at all. It was, it kind of devastated the areas that it went through. But for us and for most of the city of Houston itself, there was a lot of preparation, a lot of worry, but it didn't materialize as anything for us, thankfully.
That's the best way to go about it. Be ready and then hope it does not hit. Brian, thank you so much for the time, man. I do appreciate it. I'm going to continue to pick your brain about how to raise 3 kids, because I have no idea. 2 of them are girls, and I really have no idea what to do with them. But thanks for the time. Thanks for doing what you do, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Anytime, man.
My thanks to Brian Rissmiller for joining me. He is in a situation that I can't even imagine. He's a pediatrician, a father of 3, and they had to prepare for a hurricane during a pandemic. Like, what a conglomeration of holy bleep moments and situations to be in. I mean, that's wild. Absolutely wild. So thanks to Brian for finding some time. And if you're watching on the video or you were just listening, you could obviously see that there were some distractions he was dealing with, his little girls. And I think my favorite part was when they just came up and covered his eyes as he's sitting there talking to me. And you know what? Didn't even flinch. It's funny because it's been a bit since I've done a Check Out My Dad pod, and this may surprise you, but being a stay-at-home dad with 3 babies has been very, very busy. So I've been trying to get back and do more of them, and I definitely will for you because you've been so loyal to listen to some of these. But if you are watching the video and you see the picture behind me, the virtual background is of the 2 twins, kind of blurry, but that had to be 4 months ago, and they're almost 8 months as I record this. Almost 8 months. And what's amazing is they don't look like that anymore. Right? My son Miles kind of still looks like that, but my daughter Miller doesn't look like that. And this is something that I learned with Britton the first time through is, man, they change so fast and so much. And not just from a physical standpoint of the way that they look, but their behavior and what they're able to do and what you have to change and what you have to adapt to. And I was on my friend Sarah Jordan's podcast, and she does a mom podcast. And she had me on because being a stay-at-home dad kind of breaks the mold. And we were talking about the schedule. And I've done an entire podcast on the schedule, and that was about 3 schedules ago. And one thing that I had to admit is, and my wife has sort of brought this to my attention. It's that I'm not the biggest fan of changing what's working. You know what I mean? Like, the schedule to me was working, but we have to make changes here and we have to make changes there. And I'm not always the quickest person to do that. And that is something that is super important. Just like the oldest doesn't get her nap anymore, and how do we fill that hour and a half while the twins are napping in the morning, and what do we do now, but for snacks and all these things. And it's one of the most important things about being a father, about being a parent, whether you're a stay-at-home or not, is simply adapting. And I had to adapt a little bit with Britton, but I think it was different the first time through because obviously I wasn't staying home with her. We sent her to daycare. Daycare just kind of told us. Our nanny, Miss Pat, told us. She said, here's my schedule. You need to get on it because this is what she's going to be accustomed to. And during the day, she obviously spent more time with our daughter than we did because we drop her off around, 7:30 or so in the morning, I think. I can't even remember. That seems like a lifetime ago, by the way, when we only had one, when we were living in Kansas City, when we had someone taking care of, that seems like it was an absolute lifetime ago. But now, I have to adapt to their new schedule. Where we have the books and things like that tell us about the new schedule. But that's one of the things about being a parent. And I'm sure if you have an older daughter or an older son or older kids, that you had to go along too. And I know that sweet little Britton's not going to be that sweet forever. And I know that the twins aren't going to be, in this schedule for very long. And there will be more. I talk about change and some of the things that have happened since the last time I did one of these podcasts. I think my son had his helmet by then. We've had to make an adjustment because the helmet's working. It's pushing some of it's rounding out the front part of his head. That's a thing that we're there for. Our twin daughter, Miller, has started crawling, but she doesn't crawl like a normal baby. She's not on her hands and knees. She's on her hands and feet with her butt way up in the air. And that's how she crawls around, which I don't know. If it gets her around, that's fine. And now as I'm recording this, she's even starting to pull herself up, and she's almost 8 months. And that's way ahead of where Britton was. And our son, Miles, he was on the fast track. People say, well, what about your son? Is he crawling around? No, I think he was the first to roll over, but then we gave him the helmet. And I really feel like the helmet has thrown off his equilibrium, his ability to get back up on all fours, and that's kind of thrown him off. And once we get the helmet off of him, maybe by Christmas, that's what we're shooting for. 3 to 6 months is what they told us, and I think we're in month 3. But once he gets the helmet off, I think he'll fast-track himself back into the crawling world, and he just will always be a little bit, I think, behind his sister, who he is older than by 2 minutes. He'll be able to hold that over her head for their entire lives. I'm older by 2 minutes. It's wild. It's crazy. So many people have reached out and said, how are the babies doing? What's new with the babies? And thank you for that. I have a lot of thank yous to throw out here before we get done with this podcast. The babies are going through a lot of diapers. If you're a friend of mine on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, if you're not, please be. I welcome everyone to follow me on Twitter at Mike Wickett, facebook.com/wickett.mike. The podcast page is there. Over the last 2 weeks, I've gone to Costco because my wife is a huge fan of the Costco diaper sale. And you get $7 or $8 off of every box of diapers. And we're in line with Team Costco diapers. Like, that to me, that's the gold standard. Costco diapers and wipes. And we've saved about $8 off the diapers that we have purchased. The first time I went through and bought them for the twins and for Britton, we bought 858 of them. And then I went back the following Saturday and bought 900 more. Now, you probably are asking yourself, what can 1,700 diapers do for you? Where does that put you? And the answer is mid-October. This is the first week of September. I would be shocked if that many diapers actually got us to Halloween. But mid-October is about right. The 15th, 20th, probably somewhere in there if we do the math on 1,758 diapers. I know. It's a lot. And somebody asked me, I was filling in on WHO radio here in Des Moines. Somebody said, well, why don't you do cloth diapers? Can't do it. Can't do it. Props if you can do it. If you're someone who can wash diapers every night, if you're someone who can, take diapers, put them in the bin, and then at the end of the night wash them. Like a caller said that was part of his routine. He would come in from work. His wife had been loading up the diaper thing all day, and he would wash them. Yeah, that's with one. We have 3. And I realized that a lot of that stuff could just get flushed down the toilet. And no. We just have disposable. And I know it's not very green. It's the least green thing about me. But that's where we're at. That is where we're at right now. 1,758 diapers that we bought will last about maybe a month. Maybe I'll check that. Maybe 6 weeks. We'll see. I'll let you know. I know. That's what you're going to go to sleep at night thinking about. 1,758 diapers. Oh, my gosh. That's our life. That's what it is. A couple of thank yous to throw out there. I do 2 podcasts. I do this one, and I do one about Wisconsin sports called Wicked on Wisconsin. Find them all the same platform. Find it on the same platform as you find this one, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, wherever. Between the 2 podcasts, it has recently come to my attention that in less than a year, I think less than 8 months, we've had 100,000 downloads, over 105,000 downloads. But 100,000 sounds cooler than 105,000. It's a nice round number. We've had over 105,000 downloads, and lots of those have come from this podcast. So thank you very much. When I asked my boss, I said, "Hey, do you have numbers on the podcast? Can I see how many people are actually listening to it or downloading it?" And she sent me back the numbers, and I was blown away. The 2 combined are over 105,000 downloads of the 2 podcasts. So thank you for that. And I'm going to ask one more thing of you. You've already clicked on this. You've already downloaded it. You're already listening to it. You've obviously, maybe you haven't listened. Subscribe. That would be cool too. Hit that little subscribe button so you never miss an episode when we get these things up on the air for you or up and loaded for you. The other thing, I need your help. I've been nominated. This podcast has been nominated by the Wisconsin Podcast Association for Best Family Podcast and for Best New Podcast. I've been working with Edge Promotions and the Wisconsin Podcast Association up in Wisconsin. That's how this got started. My friend Allison, who runs the company, I've known her for quite some time, and when we made the decision to quit radio, or I made the decision to quit radio, I said, well, I still want to maybe do a podcast. And Allison and I had a conversation. She said, we'd love to have this as part of the network. Well, we've had so much success, and most of that is due to your clicks, your downloads, that we've been nominated for 2 of the Wisconsin Podcast Association Awards, Best New Podcast and also Best Family Podcast. So if you are able to do so, I want you to stuff the ballot box. I'd say vote early and often, but they only let you vote once. So just vote once. But follow me on Twitter. It's my pinned tweet at Mike Wickett. Also, it's in my bio on Instagram at Mike Wickett. I've got it on the podcast page, Mike Wickett Podcasts. Or you can go to the Wisconsin Podcast Association website, wisconsinpodcast.com, and they should have the awards up there for you to click. So if you would please stuff that ballot box for me, I would appreciate it. Again, check out my dad pod for Best Family Podcast. And also, you can vote for this or my other one, Wicked on Wisconsin, for the Best New Podcast. That one is also nominated for Best Sports Podcast as well. So thank you so much for listening to this one and all of the others that we have done. If not, you can go back and find it on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. We've had so many great dads, and my thanks to Brian Rissmiller for being my guest this week. What a story and what a situation he has. So until next week, when I'll have plenty more stories to tell you, and we'll have another guest dad of the week. My name is Mike Wickett. Thank you so much for listening to Check Out My Dad Pod. As always, #family first. Thanks for listening to Check Out My Dad Pod. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever you find yours. Thanks to the band from Silverman Sound Studios. And if you have any feedback, feel free to find us on Facebook. Search Mike Wickett Podcasts, or you can send me an email, mikewickettpodcasts@gmail.com.